More than 50% of the population in the United States have issues with attachment, and that means how it is that they form emotional bonds with other people. And this is so important because it impacts our relationships with our romantic partners, our friends, our colleagues, and of course, our relationship to ourselves and self-esteem. So my name is Bev. I created this channel to talk all things about attachment styles and how it impacts us throughout our life and our different life cycles. If this is something that is of interest to you, please give us a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends if you think it's worth sharing. Let's dive in.
I'm going to talk a little bit about attachment styles, and then I'm going to talk about a little bit about menopause and then the overlap there. So when we're talking about attachment styles, we're really talking about learned behavior, the way in which we form emotional bonds with other people, depending on what we learned, saw, felt, experienced in our earliest years. That creates a roadmap, a template for how we're going to interact with ourselves and with others, right? Our romantic partners, our friends, our colleagues, our neighbors, all of that. So your attachment style has a significant impact on your thoughts, your emotions, your communication style, your relationship to boundaries, and all of those good things that are needed for safe, healthy relationships. So in a nutshell, when we talk about attachment styles, there's actually 4 different styles that we talk about. But if I take it a step above, there's 2 broad categories. We talk about people who are securely attached and people who are insecurely attached. Well, the first thing is someone who is securely attached, generally speaking, in broad strokes, they experienced a fair degree of emotional attunement from their caregivers. They felt love, consistency, predictability. They were taught about their emotions. They were taught how to emote and communicate. And they generally are emotionally regulated for the most part. These are people who generally gravitate towards long-term relationships. They do a good job in terms of being independent and also interdependent with their partner. So that's sort of the utopia that we strive for, right? And nobody's perfect and we all have things we can learn, but that's generally the pattern of someone who's securely attached. Then we have people who are insecurely attached, and that is the cohort of people that did not get consistent emotional attunement, predictability. They didn't learn about their emotions. They didn't learn about boundaries. Communication wasn't encouraged in their families. And so they come out of their home of origin with a very different lens and a very different template when they enter into adulthood. So when a child doesn't get that emotional attunement from their parents, and there are many, many scenarios that we can talk about. Maybe there are too many children in the home. Maybe one parent has a mental illness or an addiction or has to go away for work or is neglectful of the child or abuse. There are so many ways in which we can be emotionally disconnected from people. So these children grow up and they usually adopt one of 2 different strategies. One, they either become anxiously attached or they become avoidantly attached. There are some people that become a mixture of both, avoidantly and anxiously. And those people in the middle, we generally call them the fearful avoidants or the disorganized attacher. So all 3 of these, the anxious preoccupied, the dismissive avoidant, or the fearful avoidant, they're all subcategories under the insecurely attached umbrella. So that makes up our 4. We have the secure, the anxious preoccupied, the fearful avoidant, and then the dismissive avoidance. And so this is really what we're working with in adulthood is the patterns that we develop as very young children for how to interrelate with other people. I'm going to take a pause there because that was a whole mouthful.
It was, because I'm wondering, you talked about being the in-betweener where you can either be here or be there. I interpret it as being really needy or very isolated.
Yeah. So you're kind of really on the money here. So the idea here is that if we look at the anxious preoccupied, they generally would have experienced a parent who was inconsistent, not predictable, meaning that they would have experienced some love in childhood and known that that felt really good. But they also would have experienced sharp moments where the parent took that love away. And that is extremely painful. And in order to soothe that pain, they then chase after the parent to regain that love. Now, how do they do this? They people please. They turn themselves into very congenial people. They do everything their parents say. They become perfect in every way, perfectionism. They're star students and athletes. They become high performers, all because they're trying to get the attention of their parents because it feels terrible to lose that attention. Now, that child who experiences that, they grow up into the world and they become, as you're describing, the people pleasers. They're the ones that say yes to everything because they grew up with a core wound of, we see different wounds, but I will be abandoned. I am unlikable. I am unlovable. I will be excluded. All of these things that they have experienced in their childhood sort of brings them into adulthood with that lens. And so, as I mentioned earlier, all of these folks who are in the insecure attachment styles, they are not emotionally regulated, not because there's anything wrong with them, but because they never learned how to emotionally regulate. They never learned about their nervous system or how to communicate in a way that was effective. Most of the time, what they were experiencing was their parent who was emotionally dysregulated responding to them. And so why does this matter? I'm going to tie it all together in a bit, because when we talk about emotional dysregulation and then we talk about why is it so hard for women as they go through this transition into menopause, a lot of it has to do with the fact that you're not starting from this sort of solid foundation. So these people outside of menopause, these people have much more difficulties with relationships. They generally have problems with their family, like they're not speaking to this one or they're not speaking to that one. They have problems in their romantic relationships. They can have problems with their neighbors. They don't do well in the workplace. They carry a lens that's very damaging in terms of how they see the world. They don't have a level of safety in the world, which is so different from someone who is securely attached. So that's the anxious, preoccupied person. And then you mentioned the sort of isolation. That's far more the dismissive, avoidant person. The dismissive, avoidant person, they would have likely experienced either enmeshment or neglect. And what this means is that, yes, they were likely given a warm bed to sleep in and 3 meals a day, but very little emotional attunement, very little attention, very little validation. When something hurt their feelings, they were left alone a lot to deal with it. And they developed an attitude of, I can't rely on anyone else. No one's coming to save me. It's me, myself, and I. And so they developed these sort of walls, these protective measures, because for them, the idea of vulnerability and letting someone else into their space feels really threatening. It feels unsafe. And so what I'm talking about here is that as a result of not getting that healthy emotional attunement from a parent, both of these groups of people develop these maladaptations, these strategies, these behaviors for how they're going to navigate into the world. And it impacts, as I've said, almost everything, the relationship that you have to yourself and also to all the other people who are in your life. You know, have you met people that you would consider to be more avoidant or more anxiously attached?
I have. And I think it's because when I think about like myself, I'm in my 50s. When I grew up, there was that term, children should be seen and not heard.
Mm-hmm. You and I are of the same generation. I'm turning 50 in a month. So I grew up in that generation too. And I will tell you that I spent my whole life as a fearful avoidant, that category in the middle. And it took a lot of introspection and a lot of work to realize that the behaviors that I was carrying forward as a 40-year-old, 45, 50-year-old, I was still carrying them forward as if I was operating like I was 3 years old living in my house of origin, which I say this in jest because obviously I'm not. But as humans, we all do this. We forget that we can update like our operating system. So yes, this was a very common parenting strategy back when we were growing up. You know, children are to be seen and not heard. And it's very damaging to not see a child. And so I would venture a guess that you did all sorts of things to try to get the attention of your parents. Maybe you overperformed.
I was the overperformer.
It's especially so I always say this, human behavior is really predictive. It's not that difficult, actually. There's very specific patterns that emerge. A child cannot survive, like a child under 5 cannot survive without the connection to their caregiver. The connection to their caregiver is everything for them. They are the sun, the moon, the stars, everything. I used to think my father made the sun come out in the morning, like literally. So when that connection is fragile or it's broken or it's threatened to be broken, the child panics. And rightfully so, because it is threatening their survival. The child knows that if I cannot reconnect in a healthy way to my caregiver, that this is highly threatening to me. And so they will go through a series of strategies, behaviors to gain the attention, love, approval, validation, reassurance from the caregiver. And yeah, perfection is a very, very common one, especially if you grow up in the area of not to be heard. You were often chasing after love based on your achievements. Right. Mm-hmm. Which I don't need to tell you as a 50-year-old woman, what happens is that you grow up believing that your worth is based on what you achieve. And I see lots of women in their late 30s to mid 40s that are just burnt out. And because they're still operating under the, I gotta go, because if I stop and I take a rest and I do something that's good for me, I'm not earning my worth.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that leads us into the next part is when we've been doing this, we're starting to feel a little burned out.
A little.
But then a little. And then our bodies start doing something different as far as hormonals.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of this happens kind of at the same time to create this storm. So if we look at the trajectory of sort of the average, we'll say 40-year-olds, at that point in time, the average 40-year-old usually has an established career and or financial obligations. Like most people, they usually have a family that they are taking care of, which could include elderly parents. It could include other siblings. It could include children. It could include a spouse. And then at the same time, there are these hormonal changes that start happening. And so that constellation, that storm of things that's happening can be really, really difficult for women, especially women who, as we're talking about, have always been high performers, high achievers, because that's, again, the strategy that they use to earn love. And when they can't achieve the same way, it starts to be really impactful on their emotions. So I'm so glad that we're now talking about menopause much more openly than we ever were. I think that many people still don't understand that menopause is a transitional state that can last for up to a decade for some women. It's actually called perimenopause. Some people will be surprised to know that menopause is actually one day. It's one magical day in our life when it's been 12 months since we had our last period. And for many women, they have no idea when their last period was. So the day comes and goes. And am I now post-menopause? We laugh about it because there's a silliness behind some of the terminology. But for most women, they will start to experience a change in their ovarian reserve around 40. It can happen for some women earlier, like around 35, 38. But by 40, we're going to start to see some changes. But this here is a list of 34 different symptoms that women will experience in perimenopause. When I was growing up, to me, menopause was something that happened to women when they were 60 and they had a hot flash. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound so bad. It's you get a little hot. Until you've actually had a hot flash, you don't realize just how frightening it could actually be, because all of a sudden the heat starts expelling from your body. You start to sweat. A lot of women will think they're having a heart attack, an anxiety attack. It's extremely uncomfortable. We don't want to minimize that. But when you ask most people what is menopause, they'll say a hot flash. So that's at the top over here. But these first here, the night sweats, the hot flash, the irregular periods, and all of that, that actually happens in mid to late perimenopause. That's not really happening to the 40-year-old. Generally, from 40 to 45, what's happening much more prevalently are the things that are in yellow here. The things that are in yellow are the symptoms that you can experience that are tied to your emotional health. What happens is that we go to our doctor and they say, well, it's because of stress. You have too much on your plate. You need more sleep. And I remember having a conversation with my doctor when I was like 42 and experiencing all these things. And I remember the doctor said, well, it's because of stress. You need to reduce your stress. And I said, okay, well, I have 2 sons. Which one should I get rid of? I have a full-time executive job. Should I work part-time or should I just quit? Because we're so simplistic in giving advice out to women that it's just silly. So one of the first things I want to talk about is sleep disturbances. So this shows up really, really early in perimenopause. Around the time that you're 40, 41, you'll start experiencing that. Anxiety, panic attacks, low mood or depression, brain fog, memory lapses. We love to laugh at our friends that walk into the room and go, I can't remember why I walked in, but that happens. The other day, I left my condo and I forgot to take my purse. There's no woman who leaves her home and doesn't take her purse. This is like walking out without your shoes, right? Difficulty concentrating, and then fatigue and low energy. These are the things that we start to see really, really early on. And most importantly, down here, this here, heightened stress sensitivity. Our resilience to stress really takes a hit. And the last thing that I want to mention, it's number 34, but it's actually the symptom that shows up typically the first, just not feeling like yourself. And so what does this all actually mean? When I work with women and they come to me, whether it be for individual relationship counseling, they want to work on their own trauma, or they're in couplehood, they often say to me, I just don't feel like myself. Yes, I have a lot on my plate, but I had the same amount on my plate 5 years ago, and I dealt with it better. So during the early 40s, when your hormones start to go into a state of, I would say, chaos. It's like they're trying to stabilize as your body is adjusting to the fact that you have lower and lower ovarian reserves of eggs. I'm not going to go into the whole thing of it, but what happens is that your body starts cycling in an unpredictable way. Your estrogen, your progesterone, and even your testosterone is involved. And so you get a myriad of symptoms, as we talked about, that are emotionally based. And so if we look at why is it so difficult for women in midlife, it's a combination of things. One, the lack of sleep. I think it's more than 50% of women will recognize that when they're going through that stage, they can't sleep. They're either having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. And so if that was the only criteria we were looking at, we'd already have our answer for why people are crankier, less focused, less productive, because sleep is critically important.
Mm-hmm. But if you went to the doctor and you said, I have all these symptoms, all the ones you said in yellow, first thing they would ask you is, how much sleep are you getting? And you would say, well, I only sleep this much. And maybe, let's say hypothetically, you've always, because you've been a high performer, you've always slept 5 to 6 hours a day. Mm-hmm. But now you're in your 40s and it's weighing you down. So they would not say it's perimenopause. Mm-hmm. They would say, you need to make sure you get more sleep and dismiss it.
Yes.
And I think that's why we don't talk about menopause.
Yeah.
Because it's always being dismissed.
It's always being dismissed. I think I'm hopeful that things are getting better now. Why is it so difficult for women? Because they themselves can feel that something's different. Their level of patience wanes. Their ability to handle the same amount of stress that they once did is impacted. So estrogen does a very good job at keeping us focused on caregiving, nurturing, and giving to others. And the minute that the estrogen starts to drop, there's like a veil that lifts. And we start to question, why am I the only one doing all of this? Why is no one helping me? Whereas before we didn't question these things. Now, things like progesterone keeps our body naturally calm. So when that drops, we do see a spike in anxiety. We see the sleep problems as well. And so you compound all these changes that are happening, going to the doctor and trying to get help and being dismissed, going back home and not tolerating the things that you once tolerated. It's really a recipe for a lot of failed relationships. And we see this going on right now. Even Oprah a month ago did a whole special on gray divorce. Gray divorce has tripled since the 1990s, and that's divorce after the age of 5. But what they didn't talk about was the elephant in the room, which is perimenopause is right in the middle of that time frame. And so if women are not getting the support that they need for their emotional health and for their physical health, from their partners, from their medical community, then they simply go through this really, really difficult phase almost alone. And unfortunately, that was my experience. And I do this work so that I can try and help others so that they don't feel as alone either. And that we can bring some awareness to the fact that many, many, many of these symptoms that we're talking about have to do with your emotional health. It's not just about missing a period. It's not just about a hot flash, body aches, joint pain. I mean, that's very difficult to deal with. So that's the other thing that people don't understand what hormones are. So hormones are to ensure that your body is functioning properly. And this misnomer that we have that estrogen and progesterone and testosterone are sex hormones, that their only function is for reproductive health, is false and silly. What does that mean? Like, the only reason I would take a hormone, I have some sexual health issue that I'm trying to identify or I'm trying to fix. We know from science that there are over 400 estrogen receptors in the body, our skin, our bones, our muscles, our brains, our hearts, how we actually metabolize insulin. It's a really, really important part of our system. So when you don't have that estrogen and that progesterone and those supportive hormones, and they're not just dropping, they're dropping and they're raising, they're dropping and they're raising, the symptoms that you experience physically and emotionally are very real. I know I'm preaching to the choir, to your audience, but I really wish people would understand how real this is.
So I think another thing here is that during this particular time, we already feel like we're an alien, or like, like we're already in that sense of loneliness when this starts to happen. And so when you go to your doctor and they dismiss it, I remember I thought I was losing my mind.
And thank you for sharing that. Honestly, I said, I know, because I experienced it too. I also thought I was losing my mind. And what doctors generally do is they hand out antidepressants. And so the number of women who are on antidepressants that start at the age of 40, 45 is incredible. And it's really unfortunate because, again, they're not making the connections back to emotional health and all of these symptoms that we talked about that are incredibly impacted by the loss or the fluctuation of estrogen and progesterone. So we're starting to connect some of the physical things, but we have to, as a community, do a better job in connecting the emotional things. And what I tell my clients is that this is an opportunity for rebirth, because you're experiencing this turmoil, this distress. It'll force you, menopause is a way of forcing you to slow down, forcing you to try to get more sleep because you're more tired than you used to be, forcing you to adopt new different habits because maybe your anxiety has spiked, or maybe, which is very, very common, you've put on weight in menopause. So now all of a sudden you're recommitted to going to the gym, which is not a bad thing. Menopause, if you look at it in the right way, it's a rebirth. It's an opportunity for you to regain yourself and actually finally tackle some of those bigger questions that you've been carrying around as wounds. Like, what does trigger you? What do you actually want? What are some of the things that you're dissatisfied with in your current relationship? Or what do you aspire to be? And I think that many women, especially if they were married young, had children young, never had those thoughts. They never really thought about any of these things. And so I look at it as a beautiful opportunity to say, okay, you're going through this transition, but this here can possibly be the next best 30 years of your life. So what do you want for yourself? And one of the first things we do is we tackle some of those wounds from childhood that they're still carrying around. Something like, I feel unlovable. Great, let's tackle that one. And we have certain ways that we can rework these narratives in our mind that get stored in the subconscious minds. We can rework them so that we can repattern a new thought, which then, of course, changes your emotion and changes your behavior as well. But for a lot of women at this age, it's just undoing some of the thinking around, well, if I take a moment for myself, I'm selfish. I don't know about you. I was taught that if you focus on yourself, you're selfish.
I was taught that way, that it's just, you're so self-centered. You're supposed to be taking care of everybody else, fixing things. But what about this? What about me? What about fixing this?
That's it. But it's a gender role in our society. Women are expected to care and nurture others. And many of us do enjoy that role. It's a strong purpose. But we were taught to do it in a self-sacrificing way. Everyone else's needs came before ours. And that thought process is very much punctuated for people who already have an anxious, preoccupied attachment style, because their focus is always on pleasing someone external to themselves, because they want to be liked so heavily, because that's what matters to them. If they feel that someone doesn't like them, it's incredibly disruptive to their nervous system. So they bend themselves into a pretzel to be likable by everyone so that they can feel calm and secure.
But I think when we start to do that, we kind of have an outer body experience and we look at ourselves and we may not like ourselves. We don't like who we've become because we have shifted to become what we felt like, who we need to be so that others can accept us.
Exactly. I'll push that thought even further. Many people, They don't even know who they are. I remember at one point feeling so confused, going, I don't even know what my favorite color is, because I was so focused on everyone else and what they needed from me and what they needed to feel calm and secure and safe. And that's that you lose yourself. You lose, what do I stand for? What do I need? What matters to me? What brings me pleasure? I remember saying to a friend around the time that I was 45, and she said, maybe you should take up a hobby and learn something new that might be interesting for you. And I remember crying in the moment going, I don't remember what I like. Like, you're so disconnected from yourself because you go into what we call survival mode. So again, when you get this combination of you have an insecure attachment style, you have this wounding, you're emotionally dysregulated. Now, on top of it, your hormones have started shifting greatly, which introduces another layer of dysregulation on top of the emotional dysregulation you already had. You go into survival mode. You're no longer enjoying life. You're no longer connecting with people. You're just trying to get through the day. And that's what many, many women find. And so when they come and see me, they're depleted, they're exhausted. And so it's a very, very common story. And the partner, the husband often says, she's not the woman that I married. And he's right, she's not. That is accurate.
Because she evolved to be what she thought was needed to make the world go around for everybody.
Yeah. So we need to recognize that the shifts that happen over a period of possibly a decade for many women into that menopause transition is multifaceted. We can expect to see changes physically. We can expect to see changes emotionally. It doesn't mean that every woman will experience all 34 symptoms that I showed, but those are the common ones. And what I listen for most often is the phrase, I just don't feel like myself anymore, or I don't recognize myself, or I don't feel like I can handle the same things that I did 3 years ago. That change, that baseline change, there's no blood test for that. That's a woman saying, I know something is different. And that's the start.